Hey guys, this is Sandy with Troglodyne. We have another topic to talk about today. This time it's about the two different ways that companies can enlist their own users in the testing process. Now, this is not to say they're being some sort of uncompensated worker, or this is like the crapification economy kind of thing where users are basically just being shit on all the time. No, far from it. This is about how to leverage your existing user base or a user base that you're about to acquire and use data that you basically would otherwise discard just because you didn't go to the effort to gather it, so to speak, and put it to use effectively.
Yeah, so the simplest and least obtrusive way for you to use your users in testing is simply gathering data on what they're doing. This is not the kind of analytics that you're going to be selling to people so that you can do sleazy stuff and make mailing lists or whatever. No, this is, I have a web application or whatever application I have. I'm just keeping track of sort of some large meta behaviors that they're doing. Like, for example, if I have a form, what particular things and in what order do they tend to click on them? I don't even care what they click on. I just care that they sort of take these big paths through the application, and we can sort of model user behavior based on what we actually see happens statistically most of the time, right? So when you start to establish those patterns of use through the application, you get two things. Number one, you find out what's important to the users. And number two, when you push an update, you find out right away if you broke something, because all of a sudden that pattern changes radically. E.g., they try to go through their usual steps and they can't anymore. Then you know for a fact there has to be a bug here somewhere, right? The other thing that you can do is much more traditional in what most people think of as enlisting your users, which is things like beta programs and so forth. But a lot of times they don't understand the way a beta program ought to work. When they get a lot of negative feedback from users, they consider that to be a failure, when in fact that's actually a success. The thing that is a failure in a beta program, where you're what a beta program basically is when you are giving users extra functionality for nothing, and as part of that, as these early adopter types, they also get extra status amongst the community of other users because they're, ahead of the curve, all those sorts of things. It works out very well for both parties. But the point is, if they are indifferent about your update, that is the worst possible thing, because that means you just wasted all your money actually trying to either make a new feature or fix something that nobody thought needed fixing, right?
Yeah, exactly. You were chasing the wrong thing, so to speak. And
Yeah.
it's a huge signal that, oh crap, I effed up.
Yeah, and that's the best usefulness of a beta program, is to, at the end of the day, find out whether or not what you gathered as data as to how viable is this particular change I'm making in the marketplace. That's probably going to be your first rumblings of whether this is going to work out or not.
Yeah,
Uh,
and going back to that part where you were talking about emotional engagement from your audience, where it's not necessarily that they're like, "Yeah, man, I love this product, man. You're just kicking it out of the park. This is exactly what I wanted," that sort of thing. If it's, "I fucking hate your guts, and I'm gonna go to your office, and I'm gonna kill you, MFers," that sort of like emotional response that sometimes you can get straight up in like your mailing list or whatever for your product. I've seen that at companies that I've worked for, where people they like get unhinged. They get unreasonably upset
oh yeah,
about some of these beta product updates. But what that means is that they're emotionally invested. And some of the companies that I worked at, they didn't get that.
Yeah, I think my favorite call I had with a customer was ended with, "I'm getting a shotgun. I'm coming down to your office right now." By the way, that guy did not unsubscribe. just telling you right now. What basically happens is that you figure out why the guy was wrong, and it usually has to do with expectations were not correct with regard to, say, the update that was pushed and the way it was marketed, or the way that you actually built it was actually misleading. A lot of times there's things that they call dark patterns out there that are very misleading ways that you can build software and forms that are actually really easy for you to fall into as a trap as a developer, to confuse users and so forth like that. Um,
Well, and sometimes it's not even necessarily out of malice. You know, I've implemented some dark patterns myself, just like because I didn't exactly know what the requirements were, and I just
yeah,
kind of stumbled into it, and it's like, oh, damn it.
yeah, and it can be quite unfortunate because you can do it literally on accident just because it was the most expedient thing for you to possibly do at the time, and that does not necessarily mean that that's what the users are going to want. In fact, they may hate you for it. So, or they might think this is just too much trouble and they never use it, which is the worst part of a dark pattern in a lot of cases, or they resent it and they just don't use it and they don't tell you about it because they're like, screw these guys, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
because that's usually the response that most people have whenever they hate a product. Is they don't actually hate the product; they're just like, whatever, f this, I'm out. You know?
Yeah, and that to me is the most important reason you need to have the first testing strategy I talked about, which is monitoring user behavior, because conversion is not just about sales, it's also about usage patterns. Because if you can't get people to convert to, say, a new version or a new workflow of something that you're introducing to customers, then, you're really going to be in trouble when you actually roll this out to everybody. You need to be able to A/B test not just stuff like your advertising copy, but also your user interfaces and things like that to see what your users actually consider more worthwhile to use with hard data. Most people, they just take it in front of like a focus group or a few users, or they just think it looks good, and then they move on, when the reality is, this is business. You need real data, you need hard information, and the only real way to do that is going to be this sort of live experimentation on users. I mean, we're not talking mingle of science here. These are essentially the same for sort of user interfaces, just tweaked slightly differently and talking to the same backends. They all work. It's just variations on a theme until you find out what works best for the users. You're not trying to hurt anybody here. You're trying to help them.
Right, and even big companies have fallen prey to this. Some of the most controversial updates for, like, say, operating systems is Apple. They've had numerous OS X updates where it's like, this guy is never going to upgrade because you broke his workflow, and now he is very angry with you.
Oh yeah, I mean, I personally have used OS X for years, but personally, I think everything past 10.6 has been a downgrade in functionality, because everything that works now on 10, what is it, 12 or 14, it was the same on 10.6, just less crud to click through. So that's really the big show, is that there's a lot of software companies out there that are not really thinking really hard about UX and how people actually use their stuff. And if they were actually getting these sort of analytics, they would know the answer. And it's shocking, and I mean really shocking, when you actually go into the industry, how little attention is actually paid to this, and how much money they're actually spending on testing and on developing these things, when if they had simply just put in a framework by which they could find out what users are actually doing, they could have saved themselves huge amounts of money and saved their users huge amounts of headaches.
Well, I mean, that's true. Even like you're talking about people actually doing this. Microsoft did this at one point, and well, what did they discover? They discovered exactly what was discussed at Xerox over 30 years beforehand. That basically all the UI patterns that they were trying to implement, that they were trying to make all this various little fluff, it was all immaterial to what the users actually cared about. They just wanted the workflow that actually made the most sense for a desktop computer.
Yeah, I mean, all these workflows were pioneered years ago. They did the studies back at Park. They knew all this stuff. This was not anything, like rocket science. It's funny to me, having read most of the Park studies and stuff like that. They were ahead of even our time today. I mean, they had applications where people were using 2 mice at a time because that was the best way to do some of these visual tasks. And I don't even know of an operating system that supports 2 mice at the current moment. There's a few applications you can use on there that actually support it, but it's very few and far between, when the fact is most visual apps would massively benefit from being able to use to two-fist your mice, right? Nobody's really thinking about the users very much when it comes to corporate America, unfortunately, because if you thought about the user, you wouldn't have to spend as much money, and that wouldn't mean as much power for you, whatever management hierarchy is actually ending up building this thing, because that's unfortunately not really the priority. The customer, the priority is whatever, either corporate or real politics, which is unfortunately increasingly the case these days, concerns are actually driving the machine here.
Yeah, yeah, very true, very true. But
Well,
anyways,
hopefully this gives you some ideas on how you can save some money doing your own testing effort, and hopefully be able to expand your organization and rationalize your operations. And let us know if this was helpful to you.
yeah,
And
we can also
ship
expand
us
on
in.
this topic further if you guys are interested in this, because we've done sorts of software and all that sort of stuff that accomplishes these very goals. We've been hands deep in all this sort of stuff. So if anybody is interested in how this works on a practical level, whether it means just more of an explanation, or if they're thinking about, well, maybe I need to do this at their organization, we can either make more videos, like, comment, subscribe, make sure to get in contact with us, or we can do consultations, that sort of stuff. It's all very, very simple stuff to do. You just gotta let us know.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
All right. See you later.